This podcast is sponsored by Release Winery. Join us as the story of this ultra-limited wine continues. Learn more at releasewinery.com.
But I come here more often than you, and I find it also extremely soothing and peaceful, and a lot of work, but it's gratifying. Only when I am extraordinarily busy and there's too much going on. Then I'm going flat out, and I don't have time to enjoy anything other than just getting the work done. By the way, I have a 4-month-old puppy, English Springer Spaniel, running around. So if you hear some digging or other things or a bark, that's him, or me barking at him not to do what's going on. Yeah, and that brings up really the weather. The weather is very different from the valley floor to up here. In the summertime, we can be warmer in the morning than they are because the fog's down there. And in the evening times when the fog moves in, we're freezing up here and the valley floor is warm. The whole property was completely forested, or would be considered reforested. There had been a vineyard here that originally was established in 1880. And then with phylloxera that came through the valley, California, in the late 1880s, all the vineyards were abandoned on the mountains. As a matter of fact, I still know of a few forests where you can walk through and see grape stakes throughout the forest. My drive was to get into the wine business to make as great a wine as I could. I didn't realize, I'm not a particularly avid art type person, but in some ways that's really what I turned out to be, unbeknown to me, which is that we established an artisanal winery before I even knew what the word artisanal was or it existed. And it was never the goal to make gobs of money. It was a goal, if you would, a quest to make great wine. And I came to the mountains because, as Virgil said in 43 BC, Bacchus amat colis, Bacchus loves the hills. And all things being equal, the best grapes come from the mountains. There's two kind of unassailable concepts, the fundamental concepts in wine quality, and that is you have to have great grapes to make great wine. You cannot yet, and hopefully never will, be able to take ordinary grapes and turn them into great wine. The second one is that the mountains produce, all things being equal, the best quality grapes, year in and year out. And that's because the grapes have to struggle up here. They don't have the fertility, they don't have the water, and they produce a grape which the vines have to struggle, and that the berry is smaller, and all of the flavor is in the skins. The color and flavor is in the skin of the grape. And so if you think about a beach ball, a huge beach ball, and you think about the skin of the beach ball versus the volume of water, there's a very low ratio of skin to juice. If you're looking at a golf ball, baseball, golf ball, grape berry, you have a much higher ratio of skin to the juice. And that's one of the issues, but the other issue is the grapes just have to struggle. They have to work hard. And that kind of is reminiscent that everything we do on the mountain, as almost any wine grower does in any mountainous region in the world where they grow grapes, is that there's no easy way of doing anything. It's all hard. And if there's two ways of doing it, and one's easy and one's hard, the easy way probably is the wrong way to do it. And just getting used to doing things the hard way is just a way of life up here. First legal vintage was 77. We cleared the property in the summer of 71. We got a logging permit from California Department of Forestry to log the vineyard so we could reclaim the vineyard, which we did. And then in 72, I think Charlie joined me in 72 or late 72. We planted the vineyard. And then we had our first crop in 74, and we just made wine for ourselves. Just to see how it was going. As a matter of fact, we made it in the cave up above. It's not our cave, unfortunately, but that's where we made the wine. And then we built the winery, Charlie and I. So as I like to say to visitors, don't look too closely. It hasn't fallen down yet. And we do everything ourselves. We do about 4,000 or 5,000 cases a year, depending on the vintage. We don't buy grapes.
Yeah, right.
And so it's really to the vagaries of Mother Nature. It's kind of like what I say about my children. I don't take credit and I don't take blame. The one that lingers with me for the longest is when I was a grad student doing my graduate work at UC Davis and telling my professors about what I was doing. They said, well, make sure you don't overwater them. And I'm going, okay, well, I'll figure that one out. And what we did is that we planted it on our own roots, and the plants came in like little tomato plants in 4-inch plastic pots, and they stuck up about 5 inches from out of the pot. And they started growing. We planted them in the spring of 72. And when we planted them, all the leaves fell off because it was traumatic. You pull them out of the pots, you put them in the water, you water them, but then you got to come back and water and water and water. And so I'd go around with my thumb, and I have, for some reason, really thick fingernails, and I just scraped, and it was green. So then they started growing again, and it was like, okay. And then I spent that whole summer of 72 just watering. I called myself a basin engineer because I dug basins around them. I laid out black polyurethane hose all throughout the vineyard, filled it with water, filled it with teas, put it with valves, put it with spigots, and listened to the radio and music all summer long. I don't think I took a day off and just went around watering everything by hand to get the things up and going, and they got going. But it's always amused me because they must have thought something like, well, I'm going to be on some kind of rich valley soil where, you don't want to overwater the little suckers. But that's the one thing that rang with me and sticks with me is the admonition of don't overwater them. And I'm going, it's impossible.
Speedy, Lisa? I just wanted to say Speedy, that's all. I'm really.
So if you could tell us a little more about, you talked about overwatering, but up here, you've looked into dry farming and other things. Tell us a little more about your
Sure.
your strategy or what you do.
Well, dry farming wasn't a goal when we started. It was the only way. Drip irrigation hadn't been invented yet. It was probably in the mid-70s, 75, 76. Salesman comes up, drives in, says, "Oh, I want to help you with something." You go, "Oh yeah, right." He goes, "Well, I got the new stuff, and it's from Israel, and it's called drip irrigation, and if you want some, we'll give some to you free, and we'll see how it goes." And I said, "I'm good for anything that's free." So what it was is drip irrigation. And it was so different than today because our spacing was 12 foot between the rows and 6 feet between the vines. So they brought back a couple rows, a couple, circular bundles of this stuff that was 12 feet between the emitters. And the emitters were such that they weren't punched into the drip hose. The drip hose was cut, and then they were plugged together from each end, kind of like a prong, and held together. And the idea was you would roll it down a row and irrigate it, and then you'd pull it 6 feet, and irrigated, the vines next to it. Then you'd move it over to the other side, do one irrigation, move it another 6 feet, and do it again. And so you could even then flip it over the top of the vines and do another row and another row. And that's how primitive drip irrigation was. And then the drought of 1988 era came in, and we didn't have any water. And so I just said to the guys, look, we got no water. There's no reason to have drip irrigation. So let's just get rid of it. And we did. And what happened then is I realized is that the vines did as well as they did without water. And I started to anthropomorphize about the vines, thinking that what seems to be going on is that they seem to understand, in a way that I don't, what the natural environment of that vintage was. And so I think they started changing from a growth stage to a ripening stage, a vegetative state to a ripening stage, on a more natural timetable. And they took a little longer time from that point of veraison or beginning to ripen to maturity, and they didn't need the water because they seemed to sense how much was there in the ground. Now that worked, and we did that until we got phylloxera again, almost 100 years from the previous time, obviously before I was alive. But phylloxera hit the Napa Valley in the mid-'80s, and we didn't get it up here until the mid-'90s, late 90s. And what I didn't realize at that time, and we go back in history, we planted the initial vineyard on 20 acres on its own roots. And it was a bit of a gamble. The vineyard had been disappeared, and no grapevines, ergo no phylloxera. And the Douglas fir trees that were here were 24, 30 inches in diameter, 35 inches in diameter, some of them, when we logged them out. And so we were very careful not to use any equipment from the Napa Valley that might bring in phylloxera. And we planted 1 acre of AXR #1 as a rootstock. And so we planted the initial 20 acres. It was 5 acres of Cabernet, 5 acres Pinot Noir, 5 acres of Chardonnay, and 5 acres of what we then called Johannesburg Riesling, and 1 acre of AXR #1. And then we started making our own bench grafts. And everything was fine. AXR is a wonderful rootstock. It grafts well, roots well, suppresses viruses well, drought tolerant, makes great wine. Produces a good crop. It's only got one little itty-bitty problem, and that is it is susceptible to phylloxera because A stands for Aramon, which is a Vitis vinifera variety. And so then we move into the era of using new rootstocks starting around 2000. And we're looking at rootstocks which are 110R, 1103 Paulson, and 140 Ruggieri. And these are all rootstocks that are based on Vitis rupestris. And this is a rootstock out of Texas, but not near any water sources, has very fine hairs, lifts water up from great depths with a fair amount of ease, and is very drought tolerant. So we started using, as a matter of fact, we've used all 3 of those, looking for which one is the best. And frankly, none of them are as good as AXR #1. Then in the Valley Floor, they're using Vitis riparia as their basis. And riparia, you might imagine, is along a riparian corridor, which is where it is found, again, in the Texas desert, but along waterways. And so it needs water, and so we clearly don't want to use that. And one of the things that I have been championing very unsuccessfully is for the industry to pay more attention to rootstocks, because the valley floor should be using less water. We should be we're trying to stay with dry farming, or go at least get as close to dry farming as is humanly possible. But we really need better rootstocks, and we're dealing with rootstocks that are 100 years old. And water has never been an issue like it is today, and we should have better rootstocks because grapevines can deal with less water than any other agricultural product. And in this world of 7 billion of us, or however many there are of us, we need to have a rootstock where we use less water, not more water.